Hi, my name is Sarah Spring. I'm the Executive Director of the Documentary Organization of Canada. I'm joining you from Montreal on the unceded lands of the Mohawk and Algonquin First Nations, who have been stewards of these lands and waters for generations. Acknowledging the land from which we speak at Doc community gatherings is a touchstone in our process of learning what it means to live on colonized land and as an expression of solidarity. So thank you very much for joining us. We're very grateful today to have a team from CBC join us to explain the changes there regarding reporting on your production's carbon footprint. So this team will give us a presentation and then we'll open the floor for questions. We have an hour with them, so we're really looking forward to covering a lot of ground. Please put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So I'm joined by Lisa Clarkson, who's the Executive Director, Business and Rights and Content Optimization at CBC. Welcome, Lisa. And joined by Leaticia Kaggwa, the Environmental Sustainability Lead at CBC. Welcome, Leaticia. Thank you for being here. Athena Trastelis, Senior Manager, Environment. And Yasmine Abbasakoor, Executive in Charge of Development, Unscripted. So welcome, everyone. Feel free to take your videos on and your audio on. Wonderful. Thanks. And I'm going to pass the floor over to Lisa, who's going to start off CBC's presentation, and then I'll come back to join you for the question period at the end. Over
Thanks
to
so
you.
much. Oh, thanks so much, Sarah. We're just thrilled to have the opportunity to talk to you as doc producers and doc.org about where CBC is in its efforts to be sustainable and what that means for independent documentary producers. Sarah and I were talking in November just before we came out with the announcement, which Sarah alluded to, which is that as of January 3rd, we are requiring carbon footprints for all of our independent productions with budgets over 400,000. And we're just talking about, well, what could we do to enhance the support and understanding of all independent producers, particularly doc producers. So that was a little bit about the genesis of this session. So we're really looking forward to learning and working with you, and we hope this session is helpful. So I'm going to start us off. I think that when a company comes out with a requirement, it's always helpful to understand a little tiny bit about the why, like what are we doing and why are we doing it? So that's my piece of the presentation. And then I'm going to turn it over to Leaticia, who's going to talk about the carbon calculator and sustainability plan. And she will be followed by Yasmine, who's going to talk to you a little bit about green storytelling. What is it, and what we've learned about it and what it means for you. So first of all, I'm going to ask Pooja Naranyan, who is also on the CBC team. She's really the backbone of lots of these greening initiatives, and she's going to help us run the slides. So if I could get you just to turn to the first slide there, Pooja. I just want you to think, you know, before we start, about the last time you heard about or read a story about the impact which humans were having on the planet. Like, was it 6 months ago? Was it a couple of days ago? Was it actually today? Maybe just pop whatever your thoughts are in the chats as I go along. You can go to the next slide there, Pooja. You know, the fact is that the, catastrophic heat waves, just cycle through these slides, Pooja. Catastrophic heat waves, hurricanes, floods, and fires, they are all around us. And I think to a degree, I'm at the beginning myself of my own journey in learning about humans' impact on the environment. And what I would say about the last year is that really the invisibility in a way of climate change has become visible in all of these stories and impacts that we see now all around us. And we know that that is the direct result of the burning of carbon, which acts effectively as a blanket around the earth, causing it to heat up. Next slide, please. So, you know, that's one piece, you know, the changing climate, which is now visible. The second piece really connects to some of the ways that people that are knowledgeable about sustainability talk about the warming of the planet. We understand a little bit more now about why that is, but what do all these percentages mean? And so again, just popping your answers in the chat, I just wanted to tease you a little bit with a true or false question. And that is, on the current path of carbon dioxide emissions, temperature could increase by as much as 4.4 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Is it true or is it false? Is it true or is it false? If our Earth does heat by 4 degrees Celsius, a third of the planet will become uninhabitable. Is that true or is that false? So holding your answers in your head. Next slide, please. In fact, it's false. The actual answer is a half of the planet will become uninhabitable if the Earth warms up by 4 degrees. And you may be sitting there and look at this map and feel kind of smug because the green bits, Canada's sort of kind of covered in the green bits, but you can imagine if you look at all of the places on that map that are rendered uninhabitable, the yellow and the brown, what happens to all of those people? Well, they're going to be knocking on Canada's door, and what happens to crops and livestock, etc. So that's just a bit of a sense about what the stakes are, and all that said, there was a report by the UN in the summer of 2021. It did talk about where we are on climate change, and it gave us 8 years to turn this around and really cut the carbon which we are emitting as a world. 8 years. Some people that seems like a long time, some people that seems like a short time, and I'll say the way society and culture moves, that seems like quite a short time. So it's really all of these factors combined with that 8-year time horizon, which has been pressing on us as a company in terms of what we wanted to take as our next step. And next slide, please. We know that the climate's changing, it's visible. We know about what the impact is of carbon and what the stakes are, and we know that it's pressing. What do audiences think about that? After all, that's the business that CBC is in. And our audience research department did do its latest survey on audience feelings around and desires around climate and sustainability. And in November of 2021, there was a survey of English Canada, and 84% of the English Canadians surveyed were very or somewhat concerned personally about climate change. Next slide, please. And when we dug deeper, what did they want to see about climate change? They wanted information and programs about how it will affect Canadians, about what governments are doing, what individuals can do about clean energy, and how it will impact on people around the globe. And actually 1 of 5 people surveyed were interested in content along those lines. Next slide, please. And this is the part of the presentation, good news for you as independent doc producers, because when we asked them Well, how would you like to see that show up in what kinds of programming? Documentaries top the list at 43%. So the hope is that that really provides an opportunity for the documentaries which CBC commissions from independent producers. Next slide. So with that backdrop, really why it is that we were moved to do something and do something differently. Next slide, please. We released our environmental strategy in June of 2021. It's called Greening Our Story. And I will tell you, it's really, to me anyway, quite impressive. I didn't know really the half of what we were doing on the environmental front. We have been producing environmental performance reports for over 12 years. And we decided that we would reach farther, we would do better, and that we would set targets for ourselves. And that's what you'll see in our strategy, Greening Our Story, and that we will share after the presentation. I think one of the things that really strikes me about the strategy, aside from the targets that are hard targets that we're aiming to meet or exceed in the next 5 years, is this log line that I've really adopted as my personal credo, which is about implementing environmentally sustainable thinking in all we do. The fact is that it does impact on every aspect of human life. And so every part of what CBC does, whether or not it's a storyteller, producer, broadcaster, distributor, the fact is that there is environmentally sustainable routes that you can take that are different than ones if you didn't take the environment into account. Next slide, please. So our strategies is divided into 4 pillars. I'm going to use this to talk about the pillars that affect documentary independent producers the most, and that is producing sustainably, the first pillar, and shaping our narrative, which is the 4th pillar. On producing sustainably, what we want to do as a company is look at our carbon footprint, which is associated with our productions, whether or not we make them ourselves or we license them from our valuable independent producer partners. We want to reduce the carbon that's generated. And so one of the main ways that we are aiming to do that is through the Albert Carbon Calculator, which Leaticia is going to talk to you about. And we're doing that for in-house productions and external productions. I mentioned this off the top, that we are requiring carbon footprints for independent productions with budgets over 400,000, and for productions with budgets under 4,000, just to give you a bit of flexibility, particularly in this initial period. We recognize, especially for documentaries, there's small teams with a lot to deal with COVID, and that it may be just too hard initially. And so we have offered another flexible option, which is to complete a sustainability plan. Well, you'll see, and Leaticia will talk about this, different options where you can learn what option might be better and then deliver us your plan. So that's a little bit about producing sustainably. Light footprint is really about our real estate and our building. What does CBC use in terms of water and energy, and how do we deal with our garbage and waste? Scripting a new path focuses on our CBC employees and putting in place policies and procedures which are environmentally sustainable, like teleworking. And then finally, shaping our narrative. That is another pillar which does impact on the independent production community. If you think about, well, what is CBC doing in terms of helping audiences understand what's at stake, what the information is, that's shaping our narrative. And we call that green storytelling. And that's what Yasmine is going to talk a little bit about after Leaticia does her presentation. So with that, I am going to turn the floor over to Leaticia.
Thanks, Lisa. Hi, everybody. All right, next slide, please, Pooja. Thank you. All right, let's take a closer look at exactly what the Albert calculator is and how you can use it to curb waste and emissions on your productions. So first, for some context, a carbon calculator is a tool that tracks consumption. As you know, pretty much every activity involved in creating a production requires the use of some combination of fuel for travel and transport, power for heating, cooling, and lighting, meals, maybe even materials like timber, plastics, fabrics, and so on. And as we'll see in a second, the carbon calculator separates these activities into manageable impact categories like travel, material use, and waste disposal. And it uses existing benchmarks and algorithms to assign an amount of carbon dioxide that's typically generated by each activity. This is really valuable information because it shows you where your production is emitting a lot of carbon dioxide. And we know that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas that's responsible for climate change. So we really need to avoid adding more into the atmosphere if we want to keep our planet healthy. Next slide. So this is the page that awaits you when you set out to either create a new Albert account or log into an existing one. There are 3 different types of accounts. The most basic is a user, and this can be one person or several people who are tasked with entering information into the calculator. The second user type is a reviewer. Although they don't actually enter data into the calculator, they have access to it anytime, and they can make or request changes from the users. And last but not least is the admin role. This person has control over the production company's entire Albert account. And they can also assign users and reviewers to different productions. Next slide. So when you sign into your Albert account, you'll see the option to add a new production. And then this window will appear requesting basic information, including the production name, genre, and the expected start and end dates. Next slide. Thank you. When you scroll down on that same page, you'll be asked a number of questions about the number of episodes and their runtime, as well as who the production company, broadcasters, and funders are. And if you don't know any of these answers, it's totally okay. You can just estimate them and change them later if you need to. Next slide. All right, so once you set up your production, you'll be asked to enter information based on these environmental impact categories. For energy consumption, the data will mostly pertain to where the spaces are located geographically, how many people use them, for how long they were using those spaces, and any energy or fuel that was consumed in those areas. And the carbon emissions associated with travel and transport are separated out by mode, such as plane or train. And you'll see that you're also going to be asked to indicate how much distance was traveled and the fuel that was burned, or the type of fuel that was burned, and so on. And the tool makes it really easy to figure out this information. So don't worry. If you don't know the exact distance, you can just plug in the cities and it'll calculate it for you. As for the materials category, this concerns anything that's used to, for example, build or decorate your sets. So this includes fabrics that were used, any batteries that you use, the food that was served, and so on. And you do have to keep in mind that you have to record how you disposed of all these materials. Albert will actually enable you to track whether they were donated, recycled, landfilled, converted to energy, or burned. So it's important to keep in mind not just the materials that you use, but what you do with them after you're done. And the great thing about this tool is that it updates your total carbon footprint in real time. So this allows you to see the environmental impact of each activity as you enter it. And this might seem like a lot of different categories to keep track of, but don't feel pressured to enter all this information for every single category. The tool is designed to be as robust and accommodating as possible, so not all the inputs will be relevant to your production. We also recommend that you use a spreadsheet to collect this information in one place. So not only will that guarantee that you have a backup of the data that you enter into Albert, but you can also share that spreadsheet with as many contributors as you want, and that will help you gather the information a lot faster. And if you're thinking, how do I set up this spreadsheet? What is it supposed to look like? We can actually provide you with a template, so you don't even have to worry about that. Next slide, please, Pooja. Thanks. So once you've filled out your calculator, you must submit it to Albert for auditing. If it's approved, the finalized report of your carbon footprint will appear in your dashboard as a complete pie chart like this one in the slide. Full details of your footprint are available under the reports tab, which you'll see at the top of your screen when you're logged in. And you can also build custom reports too if you want. You'll be given the option to purchase carbon offsets for your production too. Buying offsets is a method of mitigating your footprint by funding projects that either remove or avoid carbon emissions, such as reforestation or renewable energy initiatives. But most importantly, the report will unveil the areas where your production had minimal emissions and the areas where improvements could have been made. And this is really valuable data that will inform your waste and emissions reduction strategies moving forward. So for example, if you notice that in your pie chart, air travel contributed really greatly to your footprint, perhaps maybe next time you consider doing more virtual or remote work or traveling by train instead. And you also deserve recognition for your hard work. You should definitely flaunt the fact that your production used a carbon calculator to track its emissions and set the stage for really meaningful change. And better yet, if your production actually achieves certain criteria, it'll be eligible for official certification by Albert, and that just bumps it up to the next level of prestige. And if you're wondering about privacy with all of this information that you're entering into this tool, rest assured that all of this information is confidential. It's only visible to the production users who already have access through the production company account, and it's also visible to Albert. So other users on different productions can't see your footprint unless they're administrators. Next slide, please. So as Lisa mentioned, at the moment, the CBC is also allowing productions with budgets of under $400,000 to submit a sustainability plan instead of filling out the Albert calculator. This plan is a pledge that your production can undertake to basically commit to undertaking specific sustainability practices, such as serving plant-based meals, using renewable energy, or sourcing materials locally. If you choose this option, you'll indicate which actions you're committing to by filling out a checklist that's presented in the document. And this is just a screenshot of like the first page of the plan document. Each item on the checklist is worth 1 point, and we just ask that your plan generates at least 20 points. Next slide. Thank you. So filling out the Albert calculator or the sustainability plan is pretty simple once you get started, but the best way to make it easy for yourself is to tell everyone about it as soon as possible. So the earlier your team and members of your supply chain know what information you're trying to collect, the more diligent they'll be about keeping track of it. And that way, when it comes time to fill out the calculator, it's just a matter of plugging in the data into the right areas. And instead of waiting until the production ends, we recommend that you should populate the calculator or the spreadsheet earlier as you go along. If there's any information that you're missing or you can't figure out, you can always contact your accounting or finance team, as well as your suppliers and vendors, because these people really know the nitty-gritty details of exactly what materials a piece of equipment is made of, for example, or how much fuel was consumed by a specific vehicle. So they're a great resource. Also, when in doubt, you can use Albert's amazing tips and tricks section on their website. They have a ton of resources. The CBC also has a bunch of FAQ sheets and videos that you can review. We're also planning to offer live 1-hour training sessions starting next month as an opportunity for you to jump online and ask us any questions that you have. These are going to be very small sessions, so probably only about 8 attendees. So we can really focus on getting discussions going. And we'll hold them pretty regularly, about maybe weekly. We're right now aiming for every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, but stay tuned for more details and clarification on that. And if you ever want to attend one, you can just send me an email and then I'll let you know the meeting invitation details for the upcoming session. You can also contact me for any general inquiries that you have. Just keep in mind my response time might depend on how many other productions I'm supporting that have tight deadlines, but I'll definitely do my best to get back to you as quickly as possible. And lastly, but most importantly, just please remember, there's no such thing as a bad carbon report. This is really just a tool to help you understand where you're at and collect the data so that you know where to make improvements going forward. So don't feel pressured to have a perfect footprint. There's really no such thing. And so now that concludes my portion. I'll pass it over to Yasmine.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be joining you today. I don't know if I'm ever going to get used to speaking into the void like this, though. You think by now I'd be used to it. We can start on the first slide, or we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we have heard all about your footprint, your carbon footprint, and I'm here to talk just very briefly about what your carbon brain print is and what that means and what the commissioning editors at the CBC are looking for in that regard. I'm going to refer you to Albert. The UK training it has an editorial portion, and it's very useful if you have more questions or more interested on this topic. So your carbon brain print is the idea of, how your film, how your documentary, how your series is incorporating sustainability and bringing the environment into the conversation. And how are you doing that seamlessly? How are you doing that in a way that is authentic to your content? And how are you doing it in a way that it doesn't have to be educationally, overly educational or instructional or preachy? And is it effectively reaching your audience? Is it bringing in new audiences? What is your film doing to further that conversation? And who does it? I mean, this may seem obvious, but this is here because we want you to be thinking of it as early as possible in the process. Development writers, development producers, you can start at that stage to see what is your film or your series saying about the environment and sustainability and climate change. What is the message you're putting forth? Is it the best possible message? And as commissioners, we are looking for that from unscripted, from scripted as well. Actually, a great example we give as far as normalizing behavior is Cheers. The sitcom Cheers normalized the term designated driver. So if we can do that in our unscripted programming with climate change, with some of the great behaviors, positive behaviors around climate change, that is our goal. Next slide, please. So when we talk about normalizing it, there's a wide range of ways to do this. A couple of the ways are to raise the issues and to show the actions. When we're talking about raising the issues, we're really talking about content where the environmental messaging leads the creative. So that's, like our nature of things strand. Often documentaries from that area, from the nature of things, have to do with climate change and sustainability. And we are always looking for a unique POV. We're looking for wonderful, groundbreaking science, good science, and we're looking for these stories to lead with positivity. So instead of talking about a loss of the natural world, we're talking about conservation solutions, natural conservation solutions, and we do want to talk about political change, but we never want to drown out individual empowerment. We want to make sure, obviously we know systemic change is needed at this point. That's why we're here. That's why we're doing this. But we don't want a viewer to ever leave a series and feel like they are not empowered. They've lost that sense. I think Arctic Vets is a great example of a show that sort of marries these two things. It doesn't necessarily lead with the environmental message, but every time they have to perform a polar bear rescue, it's often because of climate change. So that comes up naturally. That's a great example of a dynamic, fun, cute animals, all the stuff people love watching, but then we get to bring sustainability and climate change into the conversation. And then when we have series where we are not leading, the environmental message does not lead the creative, there's still all these other options. I mean, you guys are documentary filmmakers. You all know about, try and bike, try and walk, try to have a discussion around gray water if you're building a house. But the next step with showing the actions is making sure that you're showing the actions that are most relevant. So while we talk a lot about littering and recycling, as Leaticia mentioned, traveling is a huge piece of a carbon footprint. So are we talking about the things that have the biggest impact? Are those the things that we're putting forward the most? And are we connecting the dots? If we're talking about wildfires that have, destroyed many parts of the world in the past few years, are we making sure we're connecting that back to climate change? So that's how we want to move it forward a little bit. And then the next slide, please. So I just want to end, Lisa started with this, and just sort of to tie it up a little bit, the reason we're all here and talking about this, the reason it's so important to us is because it's literally our job. It's your job as storytellers. It's our job as a cultural institution to change society, to make these changes. And as the national public broadcaster, it really is the added value people come to us for. You saw that in the statistics that Lisa showed earlier. We have millions of viewers here in Canada and millions of viewers internationally. So it really is a great opportunity. And we've been ahead of the change with gender parity. We have been ahead of the change with our mandates and our key creatives coming from marginalized, racialized communities. And this is another chance for us to be ahead of the curve and really make some systemic change. So we are excited for that. And that is everything from me. I think it may be time for questions, Lisa.
So, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. I mean, CBC team, you can all turn your video back on. And there was a ton of information. Thank you so much for preparing all of that. I know there's going to be a big learning curve as doc filmmakers are understanding how to navigate this, how to find time in their day of making documentaries to be filling this out. So there's a couple of questions already. I also have questions. I'm sure there's going to be a ton. So I'll just start off with, and you guys can, jump in, whoever feels that they're the most appropriate person to answer. So for the environment impact category, when filling out energy consumption, is there a tool to help calculate, i.e. fuel for cars or building, heating, lighting, etc.? Who would like to answer that one?
Leaticia, do you want to take it or do you want me to answer that?
Sure, I can take a stab at it and you can fill in any of the gaps.
Sure.
Yeah, so when you're logged into the platform, you'll see that it kind of walks you through each individual type of fuel, each individual type of energy. And so you'll be asked to enter, for example, how many kilowatt hours. And so that's something that you could get either from, say, if it was a piece of equipment, the maximum amount of energy that it would use, you could get that from reading kind of like on the side of the piece of equipment. Or if it was in a production facility over a sustained period of time, you could get that information from the utility bill, and then you would just plug it directly into the platform. I'm not sure. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. I'm just going to add to what Leaticia said. Each section of Alberta is split up into locations. There's a section for travel and transportation. There's another for accommodation and so on and so forth. For when the question as it related to the fuel consumption piece related to vehicles, all of that would be captured within the travel and transport section. You would document the type of travel, the mode of travel, if it was a fuel efficient vehicle or if it was a non-fuel efficient vehicle, the distance you traveled, and it would automatically do the calculation on the back end to calculate what the emissions would be and how it contributes to the total for your production. From a locations perspective, just to add to what Leaticia was saying, it looks for where you're working, how long you're working in that space for, number of days, so on and so forth. It also looks at how much you're consuming. And it asks you for that detail. It does the calculation on the back end, and it's separated out within the calculator that way, but you will see exactly what your emissions are. It does ask you for that information.
Okay, thanks very much. For productions over 400,000, are both the carbon footprint and the sustainability plan required, or only the footprint?
Well, I'll
Lisa.
jump in with that, and I'll just squeak in one other thing I forgot in my remarks at the beginning. So the answer to the question is no, only the sustainability plan is required. The idea is that it is an alternative to doing a carbon footprint. And you'll see once you see the document that it gives you lots and lots of options to get up to 20 points. And I'd say, you know, the thing I neglected to say is that really our earnest aim is to try and see a change and lead the change and make it easy for change to happen. And the part that I forgot is we're trying to do this in all sorts of different ways. One of which is the creation of Leaticia's job, which is Environmental Sustainability Lead. That's a new role at CBC. She started with us in mid-January. Gosh, are we ever lucky to have her. She's got a really unique combination of practical and academic business skills and practical and academic sustainability skills. So what her job is, just to explain it, is she's there to support production, internal and external. So I hope you do when you have a question, or if you want to sign up, if you started your footprint and you want to go into one of her small sessions, I really hope that you will take advantage of that, because I think and hope that that will make it easy. I guess the last thing though is if you've got ideas, whether or not it's about the sustainability plan, oh, you haven't got something on the list, or you've got other ideas about how we can make it easier for you, please tell us. We are motivated to see the change, and we've come up with a whole bunch of things we think will make it easier for you, but we're really open to conversation and suggestion. So that was the little piece that I neglected to say off the top.
Great, thanks for that, Lisa. Okay, continuing on with all of your great questions. So is CBC going to allow budget lines to cover the labor of doing this? And actually, I had a question about that too, as you were speaking. So I was wondering, are you going to be offering any kind of top ups on license fees so that people can afford to maybe have someone dedicate time? And also, which budget line item are the offsets going to be under? So you can, please answer the audience question first, and then maybe you can address mine.
I'll answer that. Is the quick and short answer is no. And there is a reason for that, is that, you know, we're supporting the whole industry and we're supporting internal to see the change. What we've put in place are what we think are the most effective steps that'll make it easier. And when you actually start using the tool, I mean, one of the things that we've done that is on our green production tab is that we, with CMPA and Cavco, did a Green Week in October. And Athena actually was one of the presenters, and she did a demo for a documentary, which you can find on our site. We'll share the links. It takes 20 minutes. I'm not trying to, the first time that you do it, it's a new thing. We get that. We understand that, you know, there's a Google form and different folk may have to put in information. And you know, once you've done it once, it's not a heavy lift. And we've certainly found that internally. So where we have, you know, no surprise, we have limited resources. We're investing them where we think that we will make the biggest impact for the biggest change. And what we've chosen to do is really create Leaticia's position so that she can support all independent producers, create some of these resources, invest the time in training and the other things we've mentioned. So that's the answer to that question. And I know, you know, I know everyone's always looking for more funds. I understand that, but unfortunately we've got to make choices, and that's how we've come down.
Okay, and just on the budget question, because there was another question about this too. So if someone is hired to work on this, is that going to be an approved budget expense? And then would the carbon offset payment also count as an approved production cost? Like how is that going to kind of work into the spend? And is everyone else in the ecosystem on board with those changes as well, if they're going to be part of the budget?
So those are excellent questions. The situation in Canada is that we're new at this. And so I'm not going to sit here and say that we've got all the answers, because some of the things we're just going to have to work through. So on the two questions, if you hire a sustainability expert and that's a line item in your budget, will we relate to that? I'd have to think about that. I don't think that's not an easy yes or no. Maybe is probably the answer to that. So what I would say is that if that's something that you're considering, I mean, you'd have to have a pretty big budget in order to justify that. But if you do, and there's a complexity to it, I wouldn't rule it out. So that I would leave. Maybe I think what we'll do is we'll deal with that on a case-by-case basis. If we land it, either yes or no, we're going to use the Business and Rights Production Resources site to communicate anything where we land. But I think we'd have to really be thoughtful about that and take it on a case-by-case in terms of sustainability help and consultants. On the carbon offsets, at the moment, the answer is no. And I say at the moment for the same reasons. Right now we are focused on the carbon footprint and understanding more, well, what is it? How do you measure it? I mean, you will note that we're not actually asking for, and I get asked this question fairly frequently, we're not saying, hey, you need to do 10% or this percent. We're not actually asking for a certain percentage. And it sort of connects to what Leaticia was saying at the end, there's no bad carbon footprint. What we're asking, it's really a learning exercise to understand a little bit more. And what we've seen on our own productions is that where you're thinking about environmental thinking and everything we do, you make different choices about, reusing certain materials. And so we expect, and this has been the BBC's experience, we expect that sustainable actions will flow from just the experience of filling out the carbon calculator. Once we sort of get a handle on that and people get practice at that, including us, then and we are thinking about carbon offsets. It's a tricky area because you saw in Leticia's screen right now, it's new, the offsets are in pounds. I mean, obviously you can convert that, but which offsets do you choose? There's a real importance to choosing the right ones, not the greenwashing ones. What are the Canadian ones? We want to do that in a really thoughtful way. So we're just not there yet. And I'd say that at a high level, it's like we want to get at the root to reduce the carbon instead of focusing our attention and energy on what could be viewed as a sticker to try and make up for all the carbon you spent. We'd actually prefer that it be reduced in the first place. So that's really some of the thinking about why we are where we are right now. And again, possible as we move along in this next year that we'll adjust our thinking as we learn more.
Oh, okay, great, thanks. We'll try to rapid fire through a few other ones. So when we mean budget in the terms of a co-production, is 400,000 the amount of the total budget or the Canadian portion of the budget?
I would say that it is the Canadian portion of the budget. That's what we have control over. That's what you as a documentary producer have control over. So that's, I think that makes the most sense. Again, if you have these questions, if you're wondering which, either Leaticia or me or Monique van der Mortel, who is responsible for business and rights in the doc area, one of us can talk you through it and land. But I think it makes most sense to me hearing the question that it would be the Canadian portion because that's what you've got control over.
Okay. Is the carbon offset payment mandatory? And if so, could a production choose carbon offset that are effective or based on regions or ecosystems that align with the production? Is there a list that we can choose from?
That sort of connects back to what I was saying about carbon offsets, and it is certainly not mandatory. In fact, what is mandatory is not the carbon offset piece. And I know it's tricky, right? All these words are getting thrown around. Carbon offsets are just what you do to basically make up for the fact that you spent all this carbon. So that is not mandatory. What is mandatory is that you give us your carbon footprint, which is through this Albert tool. That's the bit that is mandatory. Or if you're under 400,000 and you can't do a carbon footprint, you feel that's too much, then you would file a sustainability plan, which really requires you to look through the categories and tick off to a sum total of 20, hopefully more, of check marks, and then file it with us. So that's the part that's mandatory, not the carbon offset part.
Okay. And some questions coming in about content. If a doc production takes place closer to home, is going to have a better sustainability plan, is already thinking about this in terms of the production from the beginning, from the pitch point, how does that relate to commissions? How does that relate to the kind of content? Are you thinking about a % of content that you want to have that is addressing these issues or working a certain level of sustainability into the production from the beginning?
I wouldn't say it's quite so prescriptive as we're looking at a percentage. I mean, the CBC has been the go-to place for climate change-oriented documentary and content for a long time. We are thinking about things from the beginning, though. Definitely, when we see pitches come through, that is something that we are looking at from the beginning. Have they considered travel, those kinds of things? You know, from a creative standpoint, we want the story to be the best story possible and also take this into consideration. We're asking people to do it all, basically. And we think Canadian filmmakers are up for it.
Okay, and this started on January 3rd. So any production that has started production at that point, or like if a production was already in progress with CBC, are they having to add this to their work with CBC? Maybe you can just talk about what that boundary is.
Sure. The boundary is that as of Jan 3, any productions that are going to contract after that will have this requirement in it. If you're a production you're already in production, or you've already got you've signed your deal paper, you know, the quick answer is no, we're not expecting you to do that. And I beg you, do it anyway. You know, we announced this in November, and I really just couldn't be more jazzed about the fact that we've been talking to the producers that we're talking to. There's actually a lot of producers that have said that they wanted in even before Jan 3. I have to say, I was sort of amazed and inspired. So the hard and fast line is, if you're going to sign your contract after Jan 3, you'll see that in there, and your business and rights manager will talk you through it, and we'll repeat some of these resources. But if it was before that, if you're in production, no, you absolutely don't need to go back and do it, but we'd be pleased as punch if you did.
Okay. And so I'm hearing you that there isn't additional money for doing this work or for rewarding this work, but if someone is having their crew working from home in certain ways, it'll be rewarded in terms of its consideration for greenlight at CBC. Like there is a direct link, even if there isn't kind of a monetary compensation for doing that work, or some sort of reward for having had a great sustainability plan. The reward is actually in the way that the work is being considered by the team.
Yasmine may want to answer or confirm part of that, but here's what I'd say, just to shed a light on what we've learned since embarking on this path, is that the experience of the BBC and all the UK broadcasters who've been at it for over this carbon calculator over a decade. But the experience of the BBC is that when you fill out the carbon calculator, on average, that there is a money savings. So you're right, we're not paying extra money for the reasons I expressed, and the expectation is, hopefully in most circumstances, actually you will see a money saving in your budget when you make certain choices to reuse things, when you make choices perhaps to have a virtual production meeting instead of transporting people somewhere and putting them up in accommodations. And so that's been the factual experience in the UK, and we're hoping that for the industry that bears out, that'll be something that we'll be keeping an eye on the business side.
Okay. And then in terms of tools for filmmakers, is there a list of products or services or collaborators that are that CBC is going to be recommending, who are already like incorporating these into their business practices that'll help producers achieve that good score? Maybe this is a question for you, Leaticia.
I'm not sure if we have an actual vendor list available, but I do know that on the CBC public site, there is a page on the business and rights site, or a tab, that lists out all of the different kind of resources that we've amassed from around the world, so not just in Canada, but a lot of them are based in Canada, that can guide producers towards making their documentaries more sustainable. But I don't know if maybe Athena or Lisa know for sure if there is a list of vendors on that page.
There is a list, I believe, Lisa, you do have the list there on your page, but there's a green vendor list on the wearealbert.org site, and I highly recommend you refer to that one. There's also one on the greenproductionguide.com site, which is a US based site, but both Albert, which is UK based, and the Green Production site, Green Production Guide site, the US based, do recognize Canadian vendors that you can use towards making more sustainable choices with the vendors and the products that you're purchasing. That information is readily available. And I think it is on your business and rights page, right, Lisa?
Yeah, I think that's true. Just one other thing I'm going to add, because it's sort of felt like maybe an undercurrent to the question, is that I do suggest that you please, before you go out like hiring people, especially I'm going to say for a documentary, we'll share how you get an account. Just go in there and play with it. It's actually pretty intuitive and pretty straightforward. And so I'd really hate for people to be spending money on things if it's not just, if they could be spending it on something else from a production standpoint. But I think that the wisdom is that this is a shared responsibility of all of us. And so while it is true that on really big, complicated productions, sometimes there is a wisdom in having a person, I would suggest that for most, it is putting those earth goggles on for every position and every role, because the folk on your crews, they're actually going to probably come up with some neat ideas about how to make the production more sustainable in terms of what they're responsible for and what they see, which can be fed into the calculator. It's really, the hope is that this is a shared learning, that it's not just concentrated in one or two people, that we all actually are pulling. And if we all do that in all of our various roles and positions, that the hope is that it will happen faster.
Thank you. So say a production has submitted their sustainability plan, it's greenlit by CBC, they're making the film, something comes up, it's going to change the direction of the film creatively. Are they going to be expected to redo a sustainability plan based on the fact that the urgent story is unfolding somewhere, or in a way that's going to really change the sustainability plan they had created? And is there any kind of, I don't want to use the word repercussion, but what is the results of that type of situation? I mean, I know it's theorizing here because it hasn't happened yet, but what do you imagine?
Yeah, like I think the thing that I really want to say is that we're trying to proceed flexibly based on the information that we have and the learnings we have. And so in thinking about the question, number one, the sustainability plan will be tied to the first payment, like we'll need to see it. But of course, yeah, things change, et cetera. And, that's just production often. And so absolutely, not only will we be flexible in terms of changes to that, I mean, I haven't really thought through, would we require, another plan? Probably because we are viewing the sustainability plan as a temporary measure, probably the answer is no. So I can't see us asking for another plan. But what I would say, and I'll just be frank about this, is that with help from the CBC team, I wrote the sustainability plan. I really tried to put on as much stuff on there so that you had as many options. And I went through and tried to figure out, well, the number of points, we've said 20. What's the reasonable number of points? Like what's sort of achievable fairly easily and then with a tiny reach? That's 20. Now, if it turns out, like when you're filling it out, if it turns out that it's 15 or 25, we will adjust it. But I'm just saying we want people to stretch a bit, and we want it to be meaningful, not just a paper pushing exercise. So we're trying to balance all those things. So we will be absolutely flexible sort of as things evolve. Of course, that stands to reason, but I just want to confirm that commitment.
Okay, thank you. A question about the spreadsheet that you were mentioning, Leaticia. I don't know if they're referring to the Albert calculator, but maybe there's something else they were referring to. Okay, maybe you can just address that. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, Athena set up this really amazing spreadsheet that helps keep track of everything that the calculator looks for, and it's flexible, so you can add or remove portions that are more or less relevant to your documentary. I am not sure if it's ready to share just yet, Athena, or if it's still in progress, but we definitely will make it available, especially as everyone gets kind of ramped up on the calculator.
The spreadsheet is available, but I would stress that if you have any questions about the document, that it comes back to us. It's not an Albert recognized tool. It's something that we created to help our in-house productions capture their data. And when you look at the spreadsheet, it is a little overwhelming when you initially see it, because there's different ways and different options. It tries to give different options on how you collect your data, recognizing that every production is different. Some productions, and initially when I created it, I was thinking in-house as opposed to documentary and independence, but some productions it would be easier to capture the information on a weekly basis. In some situations, it's on a daily basis, and others it's by episode. So what I've tried to do is give different scenarios, different options. And as Leaticia had indicated, you can remove rows and columns that don't apply to you. It's really meant to be a flexible tool that you would just consolidate your data. It's a working document. But again, if you have any questions, they should come back to us and not to Albert, because it's not a tool that was created by Albert, and they won't know what you're talking about if you ask them. It's for us to answer.
Okay, great. Thank you. So just a question around, so this is coming in from the Atlantic region. So Screen Nova Scotia has arranged for their members and affiliates to take the Real Green Climate and Sustainable Production course, Green Screen Climate and Sustainable Production Training, and Green Screen Carbon Calculator Training. So learning the Albert calculator. So the representative stated that a staff member would spend 1 to 2 hours a week inputting the data. This is based on Albert, was created in the UK, and the calculator is mandatory. You can also set up a trial ahead of production to see where you might figure out offsetting ahead of time. So do you foresee this becoming mandatory for all creators, scripted and non-scripted, in Canada at some point in time? So mandatory to pay the offset credit costs. Any final thoughts on that?
I don't think I have anything to add about offsets. I've sort of said it. I think where we are right now as a country is that there are different provinces that are rolling out Albert, not every province. And so some have been mentioned in the chat: Ontario Green Screen, Real Green out of BC, Nova Scotia, Quebec, Manitoba. They're all going to be having their own training. And so I think that's fantastic. I think, though, for us as the national public broadcaster, what we're trying to do is offer ways to make it easier across the country, no matter which province you're in, and supports no matter which province you're in. So I just would say that, and I think kudos to Screen Nova Scotia in terms of they're supporting the industry to take the Real Green courses. We think that's wonderful.
Are you aware if Radio-Canada, if the French CBC is going to implement something? I know you can't speak for them, but are you aware of conversations that are in the works to start this on the French production side?
It will come at some point. I think in terms of their focus is that I mean, number one, they've sort of been involved in moving buildings, so that sort of caused some, some focus, pulled some focus, but they're focused on independent productions at the moment, but they are currently experimenting with exactly the same thing with some of their bigger productions, and I strongly suspect that we will see the same thing in the coming years. It's just a question of I'm not exactly sure when.
Okay, so we're almost at time. I really think that the sessions, the small sessions, Leaticia, that you're going to be hosting are going to be a huge tool for our members. So we'll stay in touch about that. We'll keep our members informed about how to participate in those. For anyone who's present that knows someone who couldn't make it, we are recording it. We can make it available. Thank you so much, CBC team. This has been so interesting. Thank you for taking this initiative and for taking the time to really go through it. And I think that there will be lots of follow-up questions, and we'll facilitate that and send those over. And then for the doc people, we'll share that back to you on the doc discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and all of you doc producers out there. Thank you.
Okay, have a great rest of your day.